Thank you. I'd first like to say thank you for inviting me, and it's a real privilege to be here in HKU to give this talk. I'm very excited to have an audience that's interested in the subject, because local shared values is something that doesn't fit into any particular academic discipline. And so I have to often speak in terms of the areas that people want to know about, but it fits very squarely in terms of ESG. And I'd like to tell you a bit more about how that's true. This is a little information about me. The reason I put this up actually is I want you to realize that I have quite a few different backgrounds, so I can speak in different vocabularies. And I started as a physicist. I know what something objective looks like. I know that it's really good to have measurements. It's really good to have indicators. If they're black and white, it's even better. If they can be stamped in ink or stamped in metal or carved in stone, it's even better. But you can't do that with social indicators. So I've also worked in different areas of waste because it's related to behavior change in the environment. And I've moved my way all the way across environmental sciences into shared values. So I initiated the development of the WeValue shared values approach since about 2008, which started with some EU funding to find out, what do civil society groups want to achieve? What's important to them? And you ask a civil society group, you know, your little neighborhood group, hey guys, what's important to you? What do you want to be evaluated on? And they say, I don't know. Even they can't be sure to say what's important to them. So we started on this problem, and we worked hard and found that there are ways of crystallizing intangible things. Now that's important when you do measurements, because you cannot measure something easily if it's intangible. So you first have to make it tangible. And that's what I've been working on. So here's my contents. We'll see them as we go along. The first is going to remind you a little bit about the purpose. You can't measure anything at all, unless you have a reason to measure it. So for ESG, we need to remember its purpose, and its purpose is to assist decision-making, and in particular, risks to the investments, risks to reputation, perhaps, liability, local opposition, or local support. So you have the E and the S and the G components, and the E is pretty well established. We know what good environmental measurements should look like. We know where we're going to go and find them. Governance is actually, I would say it depends whether you're going to look at internal or external governance. Internal for the corporate is not so hard to define. External could be really tricky. So it's got a little way to go still. But S is not settled down. And the reason is it's so difficult to define. And now I want to tell you a little bit about why it's fundamentally difficult to define. It's not a matter of spending more time on it. It's not a matter of throwing more money at it. It's not a matter of getting 10 committees to meet and lock them up until they come up with a solution. It's much more fundamentally difficult than that. So here I give you one example of a framework. There are quite a few different ESG frameworks, as Auntie Chung has just told us. And if you look at something like the social, we could say that these categories, these themes of human capital, sure, that sounds like something that we should measure. Product liability, it sounds like something we should measure. These are kind of universally important themes that nobody's going to argue we shouldn't be measuring them. Stakeholder opposition, that's definitely going to be important. For what? For this thing here, the reason that we're doing this is because opposition and support is important to our reputation. If we try to do a project in another country and we get a lot of local opposition, this is not good for our reputation. This is not good for liability. This is not good for conflict and costs. Okay? So these are clearly important things to measure. But how? What questions do we ask? Where do we start? I'm going to give you an example. Okay? Some of you are getting ready to go home for Chinese New Year, right? Just imagine if you go for Chinese New Year, you're already going to be there a couple of weeks, maybe. What if there's a lockdown and you get stuck with your mother-in-law for 6 weeks? Okay, you better prepare before you go. You better think about some questions to ask, you know, so that you know what kind of mood is she going to be in. Like, you know, is she going to be grumpy the whole time? Is she going to be like eating some crazy new food that you have no interest in? you think, before I go, I better get some idea. I'll ask her some questions. I'll measure where she is on the grumpiness scale and the livability scale of my mother-in-law. So you ask her, have you got all your medicine, dear mother-in-law? Shall I bring you some? Oh, no, you have it. Okay. Do you need some extra food? Has there been a shortage? No, you're fine. Is the heating working in the apartment? Okay, you're asking all these questions. And then you go and you find out, you know what? There were moths in the apartment and a lot of her clothes have been destroyed by the moths. So she's really grumpy and you missed it because you didn't ask the right question. Now you have 6 weeks of living hell in lockdown with your in-laws and you were not prepared because you didn't ask the right question. Okay, so it's really important when we get to social to make sure that the thing you think is a universal value, a universal question you ask, like these over here in this list, you better make sure they're relevant. And you better make sure that from her perspective, from the local perspective, it's equally relevant. Because she may not think asking her about her medicine is relevant, but you should have asked her about the moths. Okay, so now let's look at an example more to home, more realistic for BRI. Okay, so I have a situation where we were looking at the development of a lake. As a lake that needed remediating in Nigeria, there were several possible scenarios. We can just leave it as it is, dilapidated, but it's a salt lake. We could have salt production. We could have a factory for salt production, or we can make it a tourism spot. Okay, a few different things. But actually, in those scenarios, people forgot to ask, the developers forgot to ask the local people. And it turns out this lake is a local god. It's a local deity. Only the women at certain times of the month are allowed to touch the lake, the water in the lake. So a lot of those ideas of your development, you're going to get opposition. Your project is probably going to fail unless you have figured this out early. So we need to know the red lines. And that's kind of nice because it's in this framework. And we need to know gold stars. Gold stars, I think of it like this. In the same village, eyesight is highly valued. For some reason, the 11 villages that make up the area, they are so worried that they're going to go blind early in life that they take extra care of their eyesight. You wouldn't know this if you're a developer. You wouldn't know this if you're an investor. So your measurements that you've benchmarked and calibrated and made universal across all countries of the world may not have picked it up. And you're going to arrive there and try to set something up. And if you only had known in advance that for the price of a small eye clinic attached to your project, you would have had tremendous local support. But you didn't know that. And so it really shows you how important these indicators are in terms of the original needs. They can make or break your project. And it doesn't matter how many university professors worked to design these indicators. If you've designed them wrong, they're not going to help you. They're not going to help you. Okay? You still have a chance. They will help you, but you still have a chance of failure. Okay. So I want to show you how these concepts are kind of universal. They're such general concepts, nobody's going to argue with them. But the way that we interpret them and then we go and measure them, that could be highly debatable. That could be highly debatable and very different in different localities. And we need to be careful about this universal versus local interpretations. So I want to dwell on this for a moment. Universal concepts are those which everybody can more or less agree on. Human rights, for example. But the problem is that these give localized manifestations that maybe no one agrees with. So all of these kind of universal lists, human capabilities, Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the Human Development Index, they all have this problem. I'm going to give you a down-to-earth example. The Human Development Index actually has got many concepts, but it's been simplified and simplified and simplified because people won't agree on it to 3 dimensions. And they have more than just these indicators, but these are the main indicators. So for health, we have a standard indicator that for health is life expectancy at birth. For standards of living, the standard indicator is the gross national income per capita. And for education dimension, the standard indicator is the years of schooling for a 25-year-old person. Now, wait a minute, those are universal. what happens if I go to an area where we have an indigenous minority group of people? Guess what? For them, if you measure the gross national income and you ask them, what does this represent to you? Maybe they will say, oh, that will give us a measure of the capitalist influence on our area. That's what it measures. If you said to them, I will show you the years of schooling of everybody in your town, what will it tell you about them? Oh, that's a measure of colonial oppression. That's what that measures for us. Nothing to do with education. And you say, well, wait a minute. Well, oh, one's missing. Okay, no, okay, sorry. I'm going to jump to here. So then if you said, well, give us an example of what health would look like. Oh, sure. The measurement, the indicator of good health is if you live to see your grandchildren. Everyone knows that. Didn't you know that? The measure of standard of living is the number of children we can afford to have. And whether or not you have a good education is how many chapters of the Quran you have learned. So the local indicators and the measurement of them could be very, very different to the universal one. And so this brings us to this concept. There is fundamentally a deep fundamental paradox between these universal broad level dimensions, which investors may want to know about because they want to use them across lots of different countries because they've got them benchmarked, they've got them defined, they're nailed. Here are our universal lists for the investors, and they belong to a very strong ESG rating framework. But these are already inappropriate ways to measure them. And we go down here and we try to take these ways of measuring down to stakeholders of a local project. And these stakeholders don't even recognize this vocabulary, maybe. They may, but they may not. They have their own vocabulary. The things that are important to them that they'd like you to measure is perhaps how they honor their ancestors, the safety of their children, whether or not they have opportunities for personal development. These are local lists of indicators of things that are important to them. And so there is this fundamental barrier. There's a barrier between these. It's not about definition. It's not about vocabulary. It's about the very concept. You can't just take this concept and say, I'm sure if I work really hard, I can get you to understand what I mean here, because the answer is, I'm not interested. I would like you to understand why this is really, really important to me. And they'll say, are you joking? I've been to university. I don't deal in topics like honoring my ancestors. That's not important to me. That's not in the textbook. That's something we talk about at New Year with my mother-in-law. It's not something I'm going to talk about when I'm measuring something for finance. But guess what? You turn up with a project and you ignore the fact that honoring ancestors is very important in this area, your project might fail. So suddenly it is important. And as a physicist, starting out as a physicist, what I'm telling you is the black and white science is not the only science. The science of understanding people is equally important for your investment. So the next question is, how do we bridge? How can we bridge this universal list and local list? Is there any way to bridge it? There is a subject area which made a really big effort at this. It's interesting. There are quite a few areas where this is there are many areas where this is an important question because it's a universal problem. But there's an area that tried to bridge it, and it's called SURF UK. And it's an engineering area which looks at land remediation. But they work in the field so much that they developed a framework that actually contains indicators from the beginning. It contains 3 sets of indicators. Look, it's quite similar to your ESG, but these are the Sustainable Development 3 pillars. And the SURF default indicator domains are demanded to be localized. So this framework gives you a list of lots of things you should check. You should check them, and then you should throw away the irrelevant ones. And you should edit them until they are appropriate to your locality. And then you should add in missing ones. This is how it's designed. This is how the system is designed. So here's an example of their social domains. And if we just look at number 3 for a moment, you can see that it talks about impacts or benefits to the local areas. You should check whether there are going to be effects from dust, light, noise, odor, and vibrations. You should check on the wider effects of, say, traffic. And you should check on changes in architecture, so buildings, construction, that kind of thing. So those are 3 areas that they're suggesting you check. but you should also check other things. So the entire process for SURF UK, it's a decision support tool for land remediation projects, is you prepare for your project, you decide, clarify the objectives of your project, you involve the relevant stakeholders. These can be international, they could be the investors, they could be the local ones, but one way or another, you should involve them all and give them some kind of way to understand each other's background at least. And then you decide the boundaries of your assessment, and then how you're going to measure and use indicators for them. And then you actually go ahead and use your techniques to do it. Now, ideally, as I showed you, you're supposed to input localized indicators here. And that really wasn't too difficult for environment, and it really wasn't so difficult for economics, for the finance. But it was found to be extremely difficult for the social dimension. Surprise, surprise, that's the story we hear everywhere. It was not working, and research could not work out how to do it. And they were having the same kind of problems that ESG is talking about. They have projects that sometimes go well, and sometimes they hit a red line and they fail. So we brought our WeValue InSitu process, which is about crystallizing local values. We brought it in, and it produces proto-indicators, which can be adjusted to fit here. And we then got a really significant improvement. So now let me tell you a bit about this WeValue InSitu process. This really is the heart of my talk. It's what I've been studying or developing for about 10 years with two wonderful teams, one in Shanghai and one in Brighton, who have I could not have done this without them. We are very much a team. It's so transdisciplinary. We need people. We've got linguists, social scientists, health people, indicators, sustainability experts, environmental managers, all different people on our teams in different years, depending on the funding. The basic idea is this. We take a local group. It could be a local group of farmers. It could be a local group of parents. And we take them through our special WeValue process, which is this. And at first, they're not really sure of what's important to them. But we take them through this very special process, and it ends up, they decide these different things are important to them. And they end up negotiating and making very clear statements. Here are the statements of things that are important to them. And they put them into this framework, which they've decided. This is how their statements of what's important to them are linked together. And then we ask them to give a narrative. How would they introduce this framework to other people? So it's a complex process. People are giving a scaffolding process. So we don't lead them to the answer. We draw it. We ask them to work it out for themselves. We simply ask them, what is meaningful to you? What is meaningful to you about being in this group? What's important to you? This question involves these people going down deep into their tacit knowledge, deeper knowledge. You won't get this knowledge from a questionnaire. You could give them 20 questionnaires and you won't get this knowledge from them. So they're going into the tacit zone and they're sharing tacit information. Oh, do you remember when we did that? Oh, yeah, but then we did this. So they're sharing experiences, and then the facilitator gets them to slowly work out how do you draw out the important part of that and articulate it, and then they do that. Okay? So the shared values that come out, these statements, represent an envelope altogether of the top level of the most important things to that group. If you did another 2 days with them, you might get 30 or 40, but in a few hours, you're going to get about this number. So here's an example used in the Nigerian villages near that lake for remediation. And here's a group of the naturally occurring groups in those villages is that the unmarried men would have groups and the married men would have groups and so on. So here's one of the groups, and they worked out what was important to them, and it arranged like this, and another group worked out and it happened to arrange like this. They're very individual. They're entirely unique to each group. And we have particular materials which we use to trigger them into thinking and to reflecting, but they don't use our words. They make up their own words. And I want to take you through an actual example. Please bear with me because I want you to see how rich this information is, okay? This is not a questionnaire when you say, okay, how many of you want a new toilet? How many of you want a new railway? It's not like that. First, we're simply saying, forget my project. I want to know what's important to you. So they've said, Here is our framework. At the top, you can see children's education is highly valued, and we stand for farming. This is their words. These are their words. We stand for farming with results. On the left, it shows you working with our local resources. What we have is highly valued, and we like to discover hidden resources. That's important to us. And over on the right, it says we value the protection of God and we value good leaders. So you begin to get an idea from these statements about what's important to them. But then now look at the narrative. The narrative says, imagine you've never met these people, right? And you want to do a project with them. And I can give you 8 of these, 10 of these for the area. We like to have contentment and self-dependence, to be satisfied while we work for a better future. Thus, we value using local resources and discovering more resources. Educating the children is part of harnessing local resources. And parents who focus on this are respected. These children are better equipped to support the whole family. Result-oriented farming is valued because it's the source of family food. Rich harvests are needed every harvest season. These things we value need the protection of God and his blessings. And we need good leaders to guide us in these unknowable divine things. We value good things which represent progressively improving quality of life and the active sharing of them, and generally supporting one another, which brings great satisfaction and joy. We have strong bonds within the community where truthfulness and straight transactions are absolutely fundamental. And we keep transactions local when we can. And we easily resolve misunderstandings. Eating together regularly builds family-like bonds. We love to have a clean environment, and we often gather for collective work on shared spaces, which is a deep responsibility, and it's viewed as boosting a healthy people. Now, you've never met them, but can you see some gold stars and red lines already? You go into that village once and you carry out a non-straight, transparent transaction with them, or it's viewed to be dishonest, and they will never talk to you again. You're out. Okay, that's how important it is to them. If you do something which helps them discover their own local resources, that will be a gold star. They would be very happy about that. Okay, they're not crazy about getting many, many things. They're not saying they want to be rich overnight. They didn't say that. They're saying we like to know that we're enjoying the good things we have as we continue to progress. Okay, so you learn a lot from here. Now, going back to our method, okay, we've got this, we've produced this, and those can actually become indicators. So you can actually put them into, you could actually go and measure those things. Particularly, you could say every year, let's look at how many people have joined the cleanup crew. That could be an indicator for that village. You could say, let's look at how many children were educated by their parents. Support, that would be an indicator. According to this is now the monitoring and evaluation basis and foundation. And you can modify those and put them and insert them into the SURF UK tool, because it was designed to be flexible enough to allow localization. And here's what we did, and this is actually published in a paper. If we look at the blue was social, and number 3, look at number 3, this is number 3, social number 3, and the first 2 of those original ones have remained, 1 got thrown out. And here are some new indicators which have come from the WeValue InSitu. So there's an indicator which says that we should be checking out, we should go and take some measurements about whether there's a chance to have better quality buildings. We've got to check the influence of the project on the marketplace, because the marketplace is very important, meeting place for interactions. And for example, we need to check the impact of the project on us having a place to relax together as a community in the evenings, because we often do that. And then I'm going to show you in a moment, but this represents the 4 different scenarios, and they get scored. And then in this particular framework, you have to actually put a little paragraph to explain how you got your score so that other people can check it. And here's the results. We looked at these 4 scenarios. This happened to be just a ranking exercise. Here's the WeValue set of results. Here's what it would have been without our indicators. And the local indicators did make some difference, maybe not huge in this particular case, but they could have been huge in the aggregate social numbers. Yeah, so we have 12, 7, 15 there, and these two are different here, and here they're quite similar, and so on. So you can get some differences in scores, but you can see how you immediately go to a universal list. So this is now a universal list. This is simply a list that says, I have got these categories, these domains. I have got numbers that I can go compare with villages in China or India, but these have come from a localized, locally fed indicators. So what does this mean for ESG? What's this got to do with ESG? Well, it's kind of similar in some ways. The biggest challenge is to bridge this local universal list. And we do it in these steps. We talk about how can we get WeValue to help us understand. So here's the gap. We're trying to bridge this terrible red gap. We're trying to put a bridge across it, okay? Here's the universal, and here's the local people's values, and we're trying to bridge it. So first of all, we need to use WeValue to find out the shared values of a group. So down here at this level. And then a locality. There might be a lot of groups in a locality, and we need to be able to understand their overlapping values. We then get a cultural profile, and then we somehow relate that profile to the universal indicators. And this is how we do the first step. We can take one local stakeholder group, we carry out our process, we take the group, we take them through our process, and we get those frameworks that we showed you, and we have these themes. These are some of the themes that have come out. Only they're very specific. These are just the themes. We actually have indicators, right? Those statements become indicators, or at least proto-indicators. Well, the next thing you just do is you do it for several groups. So you have group 1, group 2, group 3. You don't need thousands of groups. Exactly how many we have to discuss further. This is something that needs to be looked into more, but we've done a pretty good job for some topics with 10 or 20 groups in some towns. And now we're talking about more than one set of values, but there's usually a lot of overlap. And the question then is, how do you integrate them? And that takes a very special technique, very sympathetic technique. But once you've done that, you now need to create a cultural profile of this locality. And this profile is basically something that's going to be very clear in terms of a bit like the framework you just saw, but this time it's encompassing the shared values of the whole locality. And finally, we take that cultural profile, which is here. Okay, so now let's just remind you, we had the local stakeholders. Here's one group, here's 2 groups, 3 groups. Altogether, they produce this profile. Now, this profile is now a framework in its own right. I take your project, I go see your project manager. The 2 of us sit together and I say, right, let's look at your project characteristics against our profile. Let's see how you score. And when we finish the scores, we can send those scores up to the universal list. Okay? And you just do it again in another locality. And you send the scores up to the universal list, which the investors can look at. So up here, we have the universal list part. Down here, we have the local indicators part, the local list, and we're bridging. We're bridging by evaluating the project according to the local indicators. And what I want to kind of point out, I don't know if you can see it from there, it's a bit low on the screen, sorry, is these colors represent the kind of top-down part of the framework. The blue is bottom up, and it's very kind of anthropological or quasi-anthropological, ethnographic. You're not going to send your ESG company in to do that. That's going to be a kind of Fudan, Brighton, HKU collaboration and with local researchers. For one thing, you're going to have to speak the local language very thoroughly. So it's going to take something that the company itself is not likely to be able to do. It's very specialized. However, when we produce the profile, one of these researchers who understands this profile has to sit down with a company representative who understands the project. So this is a joint part. And then once those scores are produced, you don't need the local people anymore. This is now just a corporate issue, and it can go up to corporate inputs. So why is this relevant to Asia? Why is this type of application for ESG relevant to Asia? Because China is embarking on the Belt and Road Initiative, or it's well embarked on it. And many Chinese companies and agencies do not have rich experience of other cultures. Although the problem of misunderstanding and disregarding the culture of others is very problematic and crucial, it's particularly challenging one for Chinese soft power, because that's a focus, and that's a focus for China right now. For China, to improve on cultural understanding would not only be to strengthen a weak area, but it would be an opportunity to lead the world, because it's an area where other countries are not focusing at the moment. So China could really skip ahead. ESG investment requires fit-for-purpose indicator systems. The need is right now. This gives China a timely opportunity to skip ahead in systematic and rigorous methods for cultural understanding. Other countries are focusing elsewhere. So in particular, we need to identify those red lines and those gold stars everywhere along the Belt and Road Initiative. And for this, we have a new WeValue innovation, yet another innovation, which is about conceptual frameworks. This is an example of what we call local conceptual frameworks. This is an example which was done looking in a study looking at residents or city resilience to climate impacts. So what we've done here are the shared values. So in this study of some Shanghai groups, the cultural profile came out to show that these things are very important to the Shanghai residents, that there's support for the family, they have a chance for personal growth, they have some free expression and communication, they want a common vision of working together, they like a long-term mindset, they want tolerance and inclusion of mistakes and learning from them, and so on. Okay, so this is the kind of cultural profile that's come from looking at different groups. So this is what you've looked at in the previous slides. The difference is we then go to a second part where we talk to them specifically about climate impacts. And then we find out there are gold stars. There are particular areas that would encourage them to stay in Shanghai even when climate impacts were hard. And there are things that would cause them to leave. For example, anything affects the health of my children, and I'm gone. I'm out of here. But if there's a bit of discomfort, if there's only a little bit, it's not a problem. But if there's a lot of discomfort in hot weather, then I might begin to leave. But on the other hand, city leadership and administration is a really big attraction. I have so much pride and belief in the city administration that in their emergency management capability, their public administration and how professional they are, and their strategy that they put citizens before business, that this is a really big plus. And actually, I'm really not likely to leave, even if some of these get bad. And anyway, I know that Shanghai has better resources than most other cities in China, so it's a really big gold star. So that's a conceptual framework. And we can do something similar for ESG for different areas. This is one for Vienna. And you can just to show you how different it is. So they like universal participation. They want everybody in town to be contributing. They're very big on family groups. They want public spaces and cafes and things designed for family groups. It's important to them. And what would make them leave? What would make them leave is social justice. If they think the government's making decisions that are not fair for migrants, not fair for poor people, they will leave in disgust and go and live in another town. This is so strong that they are constantly judging the nature of the governance. The things that make them want to stay, green urban spaces. Vienna has lots of nice parks, and it's got fantastic public transport, and these are really big reasons they would stay. They are gold stars, and those are the red lines. Is the WeValue process mature enough? Am I talking about some new thing that was invented last month that I'm kind of saying, hey, this is going to work? We're option number 25 on your list of different frameworks. Where has it been used? What context? What's underpinning the theory? I'm going to go through these just quickly, just to show you a little bit of the depth. What other contexts have we already demonstrated? Here are some examples. Slums in India, towns in Nigeria, Indonesian Muslim communities, Thailand remote villages, Botswana villages, Hong Kong NPOs, UK deprived areas. These are some of the areas. And we've done it in terms of village leaders, schools, companies, NGOs, charities, universities, so on. Okay, these are all examples of where we've used it. I'm just going to quickly show you a little bit of detail about the actual process. Very quickly. In fact, I'm not, because I'm going to run out of time. But we have a photo elicitation where people choose photographs and it helps them discuss more what's important to them. Then they have trigger statements that help them learn to negotiate. And then they put these together one by one and give their narrative. And in this process, I want to just explain to you what's happening is the people in the group are going from explicit discussions down to their tacit zone. They're talking about their experiences. So we have a relation, we've already studied this with a lot of depth in terms of underpinning theoretical frameworks, Polanyi's personal knowledge theory at the micro level of processes, or Nonaka's Seki knowledge creation, which we'll look at in a moment. So the participants go down to their tacit zone, they interact with each other in the tacit zone, and they slowly, through very specific micro processes, we've analyzed this half a line at a time through a 3-hour workshop. They negotiate and renegotiate meaning. They go through cycles of meaning making until they produce those frameworks. And here's examples of the cycles of meaning. Here's like a bit of a transcript, and it's being coded for the disruption, denotations, reflections, groping, reorganizing the concept in their brain. And then we see these kind of cycles of meaning making happening. We have some papers on that if you're interested in that. What's happening in the group the group is going through some of the Seki framework, where you're going from tacit knowledge being converted into explicit. The explicit is then being designed for transmission to the rest of the world. The rest of the world can read that and understand what it means in tacit. So there's a lot of we have a lot of things that we can talk about with respect to the Nonaka's Seki framework. Nonaka also talks about knowledge creation. If you go across the Seki framework, this is why this framework was devised. Businesses can create knowledge. You can have innovations produced by going through this in a spiraling form. And we know that that's what happens in the WeValue process in some cases. In the field of indicator development, for example, sustainable development, indicator development, there are models which, for example, talk about the need for pressures and mechanisms and receptors. We've identified these and have this in a paper. When you look at legacies, this is a very interesting application. If you look at the legacies of project before the project team has gone through a WeValue process, and you ask them, what are the legacies of your project? They will tell you something like this. This is a study done with the Arts and Humanities Research Council of the United Kingdom. They wanted to know how some projects, what kind of legacies they'd left. And this is what this team had said was their legacy. After we took them through WeValue and we looked at different stakeholders and what they saw, these are the legacies that they identified. So if you're monitoring and evaluating projects and you want to find intangible legacies, this is a very good way to do it. There you are. Publications in quite a few different fields. This shows you across the physical sciences, humanities, design, business, education, sustainability indicators, and environmental management. We have published papers, including these subtopics of land remediation, ecosystem services, transformational learning, and so on. These are some of the areas we publish in. And I just wanted to mention mapping. If we start to look across, as we get more and more data sets, we now have maybe a few hundred, and you look across them, you could look at things, for example, of all the things that are important to these people, were any of them environmental? So the ecosystem services guys are really interested in that. What is the value of a forest to the people in the context of everything else in their lives? And then we can spot which of these are environmental. So you can start to have a map across different groups. In this case, I think most of these were in Nigeria, 2 different towns, cities in Nigeria. And then we compared them to similar groups in other countries, in Senegal and so on, in Indonesia. And you start to have this ability to map the different types of things that are important to people in different parts of the world or different localities or within one town but different groups. How do what's important to the teachers differ from mothers, for example? So where to from here? Where to next? Well, we suggest that if you want to move towards this being a useful, practical tool for ESG, we should go probably to an area that's of particular interest to a BRI locality. So it could be a port area, it could be a rural area that BRI is interested in. Once we've developed these cultural profiles, we can interrogate them for lots of different types of projects. So we may as well go to an area that's of particular interest for BRI, carry out lots of these group processes, obtain the cultural profiles, and then we can interrogate them against different project types. And for each one, produce an ESG scoring. And this can go up into a universal list. And of course, you can do it in another locality, either nearby or in a different country. And just to remind you, the activities at the bottom need to be done by WeValue experts or anthropologists, researchers of that type. The red type has to be a combination. It has to be working in partnership. And the gray up here, once you let go and you've got your scores, you submit them. Those can be people in other cities looking at ESG universal lists. Thank you very much. That's all I have to say. And I'd like to say thank you to my wonderful teams in Shanghai and Brighton. Happy to talk to any of you later or take questions later. Thank you.